We are experiencing a crisis. And this is a crisis that affects almost every one of us in some way. To measure this, the CDC has published a statistic that 6 out of 10 Americans are living with a chronic illness. That means that over 60% of the people in this room are most likely living with a chronic illness. Now, when we would discuss this issue, we would commonly think about the common diseases you hear on the news, like cancer or diabetes. And while that's valid, I'd like to take a step back and look at this from a different perspective. Because while these may be the diseases that affect the most people individually, there is another category and subset of diseases that are on the rise. And those are medically rare diseases. Once seen as an anomaly by doctors and researchers, they were seen as little of a public health concern. But now, the National Institutes of Health have decided that they affect 25 to 30 million Americans. Out of the over 7,000 diseases identified as rare and neglected, only 500 have approved treatments. And those are treatments, not necessarily the cures. This leaves a large portion of the population without hope, because how can we tell them to fight a disease that researchers don't even understand? But what if I were to tell you that people who are on death's door from these kinds of diseases can and are being saved, and that we've had this saving treatment since the 1950s? This idea was organ transplantation. Now, organ transplantation is a rather old idea, and it's existed in almost every culture, as many mythologies include stories of divine transplantations. And there are recorded attempts of transplantation as early as the Egyptians in 1550 BC. But as the medical research began its advent, doctors were confronted with these new rare diseases that we were just discovering, and organ transplantation became harder to ignore. I mean, imagine the idea of being able to replace a diseased organ with a healthy one, eradicating all damage done to the organ, and potentially removing the disease entirely. And so, in the 1950s, doctors and researchers began trying to figure out how this could be accomplished in strength. And in 1954, the first successful transplant was conducted. And over 800,000 transplants have been conducted since 1988. Now, it's at this time that I'd like to disclose that organ transplants, while amazing, can't solve everything. It's more like trading one chronic illness for another chronic illness in the hopes that managing life with someone else's organ will be better than managing life with your disease. And in many ways, it is totally that way. And this procedure continues to help those that are in need. As the last 12 months, as of 2024, there have been over 45,000 transplants conducted. That is amazing. But it's created another problem, because currently, as of March 2024, there are over 100,000 people waiting on an organ transplant. And these are not just people who could be helped by one, these are people who are in medical life or death need of an organ transplant. And this has led us to a crisis. But we found a solution. And the solution originally was the creation of the organ transplant list. Now, originally, transplant centers were responsible for procuring organs, finding donors, and managing their patients, all by themselves. And some organizations got together and created things like the United Network for Organ Sharing, or UNOS, which created a list that helped manage donors and patients. And in 1984, Congress passed an act that nationalized this list to help more efficiently match donors to patients. Currently, over 103,000 people are on the UNOS National Transplant List nationwide. This list is in a constant state of change based on medical criteria, so it's a more dynamic list, not a specifically just wait your turn kind of list. And while this is a great solution, it's given us another variation of the original crisis, because there is not enough organs suitable for transplantation, and this leads to a long wait of typically months to years just to get an organ. And the problem is that this is not just a long wait, but more often than not, is a deadly wait. The American Transplant Foundation has found that 17 people die in American hospitals every day while waiting for an organ transplant. For perspective, kidney and liver diseases, which can be cured by transplants, kill 96,000 Americans, more than prostate cancer and breast cancer combined. And I don't say that to minimize the sufferings that people who have other diseases go through, but I have always found it weird that the organ transplants don't see the same amount of public support as these other diseases. In fact, how many of you know that just like breast cancer is symbolized by a pink ribbon, organ donation is symbolized by a green ribbon? Or that April, this month, is National Donate Life Month, a month entirely surrounding support for organ donation. But despite this, 90% of Americans still support organ donation when asked. That's great. But the problem comes when only 60% of Americans are signed up as registered organ donors. This is a problem. But you may still think that 169 million people, that's gotta be plenty. Well, the problem is that further on, only 3 out of 1,000 people die in a way that leaves them suitable for organ transplantation. That brings us down to a total number of 507,000 future donors. And there are over 100,000 people who need these transplants right now. And by the time I'm finished with this talk, at least 2 more people will have been added to the organ transplant list nationwide. This is a problem. But why does this discrepancy exist? Why are so many people supporting organ donations while not actually being organ donors? The simple reason is that this topic inspires a variety of fear. Talking about organ donation means talking about our own mortality, and that brings fear with it, and I understand that. It's such a common factor that the Mayo Clinic has done extensive research into these fears to try to help debunk and ease the fear surrounding this. So, as we delve into this topic, there are several things that I'd like you to remember when considering this topic. First of all, anytime that you're in a hospital, doctors will do anything they can to save your life. Your life is always their first priority. Donation only occurs after the doctors have declared you dead that are legally not affiliated with donation at all. Also, please remember that donation is a respectful medical procedure. Donors' bodies are never disfigured, and the decision to donate doesn't interfere with any funeral arrangements. Viewings are still possible as well. But some of you may be thinking, what if I'm not really dead when they say I am, and they try to take my organs? Although that's a popular topic in tabloids and TV shows like Grey's Anatomy, in reality, people don't just wake up after they've been pronounced brain dead. But if that's still a fear for you, you'd be happy to know that organ donors are given more tests at no cost to their families to determine that they are truly dead than those who aren't. Now, the last fear I want to discuss in this section is a different one. This person may agree with 100% everything I've said before and would donate, but they believe that because of their health, or their age, or even their religion, that they shouldn't donate. I just ask that you don't prematurely disqualify yourself. Very few medical conditions automatically disqualify you from becoming an organ donor. It's based on a strict medical criteria. And there's no age cutoff for being too young or too old to donate your organs. People in all stages of life need organ transplants. And most major world religions, including that of Christianity and most Christian denominations, support organ donation as a form of compassionate giving. Fear can paralyze us, and even after my entire talk, you may still have some unaddressed fears, and that's okay. But if that's you, I ask you to remember this quote from Nelson Mandela. He said that I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave man is not he who does not have fear, but he who conquers that fear. Now, some of you may be asking why I, of all people, decided to speak on this topic. And that's a good question, because I have to disclose that I have an inherent bias. Meet my sister, Lydia. And yes, this picture is deceiving because she's actually 4 years older than me, and if you look in the background, you can See, me. But why I chose this year was because this was the year, when she was 4 years old, that she was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis and primary sclerosing cholangitis, two extremely rare diseases that both affect the liver. And they are a statistical wonder to have at the same time. They would progress, having no cure, until they killed her. This started a cycle and a litany of medications and procedures that my sister was undergo. Also, a cycle of hospitalization whenever her condition would spike, and her doctors would have to keep her hospitalized until they could get everything back under control. In April 9th of 2017, my sister had a liver transplant. She was one of the luckiest people because she was able to get this, because she was on the top of the transplant list nationwide. She underwent several complications, including, but not limited to, arterial blockages, her body attacking the organ, and even having to undergo chemotherapy for a long time. All this compounded and eventually ended up with her on the transplant list for a second liver, once again at the top of the national transplant list. And luckily, in May 10th of 2017, she had her second liver transplant. This also had complications that would happen in many different ways. Commonly, the doctors would fix one issue only to be confronted by another one just a few days before we were set for outpatient care. By the end of her care, she would be told that she had had literally every complication that a transplant patient could have. But organ donation has a bigger effect, not just on the actual people receiving the organs, but it has an effect on those who are family members of those who have given. Now, Mayo Clinic states that many families say that knowing their loved one helps save or improve others' lives helps them cope with their loss. A great example of this is one man named Abraham, who was an overly compassionate young man. His mother would say that he was the type of person who, if he saw someone struggling or if he saw people bullying someone, he would go and protect them. He would take them under his wing and give them whatever they needed. Sadly, Abraham died before he was able to finish his collegiate studies. His mother reflected on his choice to become an organ donor and his death, and ultimately said, "I feel very proud of my son. And in my eyes, he's a hero." His last compassionate act was that of saving lives. He was a giver who gave to the very end. This is the power of a gift, that we all have the power to give, and it costs us nothing. And so, if there's anyone here who has yet to give this gift, I'd like to explain how this can be accomplished. And simply, there are three ways. The first is you can register at organdonor.gov for your state's registry. Most states have registries, and once again, you can do that at organdonor.gov. Second of all, you can designate it on your driver's license when you obtain or renew your license. And last, you can tell your family. Make sure they understand your wishes regarding organ donation and that they will tell the doctors what you wanted when the time comes. The best options are the first two, because they legally authorize your donation upon your death, but you can do any of them or all three in order to become an organ donor. Yes, there is a crisis, but we have the tools to fix it. All we need is you. What choice will you make? 7 years ago, my sister's life was saved, and I can say that she hasn't wasted a second of it. She is currently a registered nurse working in an ICU in Evansville. She is also continuing her education and has almost finished her bachelor's degree in nursing. Her dream job is to work in the transplant field on a transplant unit and help people in the exact same position she was in, especially kids. What decision will you make knowing these results? I'd like to thank all of you, especially those who are or will give the gift of life. Thank you.